Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Perspectives. You have Martina and Lisette. And we are continuing our conversation excuse me, I got tongue tied. We are continuing our conversation with Sylvia around identity and the proximity to whiteness conversation. And if you have not watched the last video of part one of Sylvia's story and just listening to her talk about different topics, please go back and watch that, and then come back and watch this one. So where we're going to, just pick up, we heard a lot of Sylvia's story in the first video, and you even started to get into your different identities and how you didn't want to have certain identities and how that connected to that proximity to whiteness. But one thing I really wanted to kind of pick your brain and ask a little bit more about, and it's something that I know I struggle with, and Lisette in a way, is that you mentioned about not letting people see you, and how you wanted to maintain this certain level of professionalism, and how that's how you kind of lived your life, for a little bit. You just didn't want to, let certain people in, or and so to me, I would love to hear a little bit more about that. And again, that's something that I definitely struggle with. So I'd love to hear more from you about that.
Yeah, I think a couple things I'd say around that. It really was, in organizing and community organizing, you start by doing a one-on-one with people. And really, in that one-on-one meeting, there are certain, I don't know, there's guidelines, but you really want to get at the root of what motivates people, why they do what they do, what their belief system is. Because you think about that in terms of how you're going to build commonality and purpose for whatever change people want to see. And I never went, I made a conscious choice that I never went the community organizing route. That was a conscious choice for me, because I believe that the data was important. And sort of building on a little bit of what I was sharing last time, somehow when I was on a protest march, when I was in my teenage years, I got this idea, well, protest marches are good, but if you really want to and do help to make a difference, but you also have to know the data and the numbers and how many people are being impacted, right? And so it wasn't until my third job out of college that I discovered the field of public policy, because I was working as an analyst in the governor's office, the governor for the state of Illinois, and realized that everyone around me had this degree in public policy but me. And again, public policy is a relatively new field 40 years ago. I didn't know anyone who had ever been to college, but when I understood what a degree in public policy was, I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's what I want, because that's how you create societal change. And having been an activist and raised by activist parents, I knew that that was sort of where my path and mission. I didn't know what it would look like, but I knew that it would be about how do we help to create the societal change. But even in that, in those early years, and even well into my 40s, I was privileged to work for predecessor organizations of the Latino Policy Forum. There was an organization called the Latino Institute. I worked for Notre Dame Institute for Latino Studies. So I was sitting at a lot of these tables, speaking with the Latino community, and understanding what the Latino community's needs were, and how do we get society, how do we get policy to respond to what some of those needs were. So I would be in some, pretty meetings in the governor's office, meeting with a lot of other policy advocates. And I just, now looking back, I just always had on my professional manner. I never talked shop. I never shared much about who I was. I didn't go to lunch with people. I didn't try to make friends with them, because they weren't me, right? They were, even the other activists or advocates, they were white liberals, but their experience wasn't my experience. So I didn't even know, even though I was sitting at the table with them, I didn't know how to relate to them. I'm talking to, I was in Springfield in the early 1980s, before we even had our first Latino elected in our General Assembly. right? I mean, it was a long time ago, right? I would speak out on the issue that I was concerned about or the work that I was doing, but I always kept who I was closed, and looking back on it, I can see it now, right? That I didn't make friends. I didn't let people know who I was. I didn't go to lunch with people. I really kept that professional distance, for better or worse, right? Now, in some ways, keeping that professional distance sort of helped me in the sense that I realized that, people didn't know my business. People didn't know my business and I didn't have to worry about that. But then you see how much of the world does revolve around relationships, and people feel comfortable asking you out to lunch and you going to lunch and you sharing about your families. And it took me a long time to really feel comfortable doing that. And literally, it's only been well into my 40s where I think I finally began to unpack that and allow myself to be seen a little more. But even, people often say being the head of an organization, especially a nonprofit, is one of the loneliest jobs you can have because you have no peer. So now building and running the Latino Policy Forum all these years, I'm collegial with all my staff, right? But I share a little bit more now than I certainly did when I started, because that's been part of my process. They got to know me a little bit. I want to know them a little bit. But I can't say that they'll ever be my friends, not that I don't like them, but because I'm in that seat, right? And I can't go and tell them, whoops, I'm worried about the budget. Or I can't go tell them, here's what I'm concerned about, because I had this idea that they had to see me as a strong leader so that they could feel safe and strong and secure, right? And that if I showed my weaknesses or if I showed my fears, then that would impact their sense of feeling vulnerable or more vulnerable in the organization that we're in. So I felt that I had to always show that I was in control, knew what I was doing, didn't let my emotions show, didn't let people know when my feelings were hurt, that I was, this really smart, dedicated person who they didn't really know a whole lot about, both my staff and publicly. And it's, as I said, I'm still unpacking it and still sharing a little bit more. But yeah, that my daughter says to me, I only have one daughter, and she's like, Mom, when do you have fun? I am, my MO is that serious professional, right? And I thought that's what I needed to be respected, to be credible. I didn't know how to be different. Those were the examples that I saw.
But that was really powerful, though, because I think a lot of us who are children of color or children of immigrants, I think we often we want this stoic sort of appeal because we're like, well, we don't want them to be too attached because they don't know us, we don't know them, and it's like, well, I don't want to let you in because I don't know how you're going to perceive me, or or how I'm going to perceive you. And I will definitely agree with you. That's still something that I'm working on myself. I mean, I've and I'm one, as on here, Alyssa and I often say, like, both of us are very introverted. And we always talk about, how even though we are introverts, we do like having those one-on-one conversations, which is why I think, why we decided to come on here and open up this platform, and then we start to have speakers on, because we do like having that one-on-one, and we do well with that. And so I know for me, definitely a relationship building is still something that I'm working on. It is definitely a work in progress. But Lisette, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no, I think when you were talking, Sylvia, it reminded me of sort of the struggles and the conversations that Martina have had in the past about how, it's hard to show up as your authentic self, particularly in workplaces, because in the places that I've been in, for the most part, the majority are white, my colleagues are white. And there's very few people of color around that I can maybe relate to, or sort of have, communications with. And, the team I'm on is probably the most diverse team, and like sort of where I work at. So I have that, but to, like if I'm in the lunchroom, I really don't want to partake in conversations because I can't relate to a lot of the conversations that are going around me. Or I'm over here, like, sometimes I'll listen to conversation, I'm like, that is the most shallow conversation I've ever heard. And it's like, it's just like, I can't even, partake in that because it just does not resonate with me. It just doesn't hit that. And people will be like, she's just, I've heard people say, like, you're very quiet, you don't really, and I'm like, there's not, if I can't really relate, or if there's anything that I can't really just put into a conversation, it's energy that I don't want to use into a conversation just for appearance's sake. And I think we're brought up in this, society that really values an extrovert in society, but also has this idea of how you should, speak, how you should interact, what you should be doing. And there's all these things of like what you should be doing. And, a lot of these things were made by white men, these expectations and these things. And it's like, that's not how I operate. It's not how my family operates. That's very completely different.
Yeah, so for me, it was also, and it's funny because I have let it go because I had to think about it, although I know it's still there, is I always needed to feel like I needed to feel strong, and I could never feel like I could show my weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Those were the two, wherever they came from, that was sort of how I operate in the world, right? I would never let people know my weaknesses or my vulnerabilities. I always felt like I had to show up strong and in command, and like I knew what I was talking about, right? And how much of that is related to these leadership styles around white men leadership, and I don't know, but it's sort of like what sort of got indoctrinated in me, and then peeling back the layers around, well, I can show my vulnerabilities, or I don't always have to be strong, or I can ask for help. Oh my goodness, what a concept. I can ask for help. I don't have to do it alone, right? And that's what I'm still learning, right? I mean, in terms of how do you create a community that you're with so that you're all doing it together, and you're not the only one. You're not the only one. So someone told me once, yeah, Sylvia, it's like, you don't have to be the lone tree in the forest anymore. You've got the forest around you. And it's like, okay, how do I help utilize that forest that's around me? So I'll also share, since part of this is about how, don't know that all of your audience is women, but I'm assuming a lot of it is. At the same time, I also have done a lot of, before I think it was certainly as, I'm going to use the word, it's not the word I want. Before it was as, not common, that's not the word, but before it was more frequent than it was, I was doing personal development work 30 years ago, right? So I did workshops, on different seminars, just on a variety of different topics that would really help me understand, who I was and what the awareness was that I wanted in life. And I'll say two things around that. One of the ways in which I've had this dialogue with myself, even now knowing that it's about how I relate to proximity to whiteness, but not knowing that literally 30 years ago, I woke up one day and I said, I've got to go on retreat. It has to be in New Mexico. And I want to learn about indigenous spirituality. And I asked 4 people where I should go. 3 people said the same place. And so started me on this journey, and I'm very much a novice and would not claim that it's a lived experience, but one that I've tried to learn from, where I did both a spiritual retreat 1 week when I was in New Mexico, And then another week, my sister knew a friend that hosted me, and she took me to sweat lodges and to a women's indigenous group talking circle, and just really sort of gave me exposure to that way of being and that way of life. And that has really is certainly one of my foundational pillars. And I can't now say it was a rebellion to proximity to whiteness, but it was. Now looking at it now, it's like, how else is there to be in the world that's not this typical standard
Yep.
of what we perceive? What are other ways of being, thinking, understanding the world, understanding ways of respect, honoring culture, honoring the earth, you know, understanding that when we say the shoulders on who we stand, that it really is our ancestors, and that if we're attuned, that we can feel those ancestors and know that their spirits are with us. And I'm still working on all that. I won't say that I get that, but I know that some people do. So that piece, and then I just it was like just the blessing that came. My birthday was last week, and the other way that I sought out something that was different. For 3 years, I did the Aztec dancing. And again, I don't talk about this a lot, but for 3 years, every week, once or twice a week, you know, I was there learning the danza and the steps and what it meant and the connection to the earth, and knowing that these have been traditions and dances that have been done for centuries. And you know that dance is a part of many, many cultures, right? But that dance isn't just dancing for the sake of dancing. That dancing, you're praying for the rain for your crops. So you're praying for water, and you're praying for, you know, all the different things. You know, the dance is prayer even, right? It's that even that idea that dance is prayer. And so I was thinking, you know, I haven't talked to those folks in a long time. It's been a long time since I've done that. And I would see them every now and again. I was like, I don't know that I want to go do danza again, but I should think about how I might get connected to them again. And here I was walking along. I live very close to the lake. Friday, I was walking along the lake, and I saw precisely the person I was thinking about, and they were carrying the drum, and they were coming to do an Aztec dance practice on the lake, on the sand. And it was the day after my birthday. And I said, do you want to join us? I said, well, I don't think I can say no, because it's just too synchronistic in terms of how this is happening. And then it just felt like it was their son's birthday, and my birthday had been the day before. So it just really felt like this beautiful blessing of, yeah, this is part of how my birthday is being celebrated and acknowledged this year as I take another trip around the sun. And that I had put out that intention, that prayer, if you will, and we could not have planned it. I was thinking, I'll have to call so and so and so and so to go find their phone number, and then there they show up, literally in my backyard.
Oh, that was, again, that was something really powerful to hear, and it sounds like I can hear it in your voice as you're talking about it. But you know, how did that make you feel? Like, you know,
Really,
the fact that, yeah, like it was just your birthday. You have been wanting to reach out to this person to reconnect, and then all of a sudden they're at the lake.
well, just the synchronicity of life, right? I mean, and you know, I do, you know, whether we call it prayer, intentions, whatever we call it, right? Most faith traditions have something around that, and when you call for it, it's answered, right? So it just, I mean, I felt incredibly honored. I felt incredibly blessed. But just know, yeah, okay, universe, God's listening, because I asked, and that's what, you know, they showed up, right? In ways I couldn't have planned for them to show up, right? So, but the other piece I want to say about that is I think as who we are, and as we're bifurcated of the duality or of what we navigate, right? One of the things that I always say is, you know, I really do feel it's foundational important for us to understand our cultural roots, whatever that means for us, from whatever culture, tradition, country of origin we come from, because that's where we come from, right? And I think that so much of our chaos, confusion, especially for young people, is that's all gotten lost and omitted in today's modern society, right? But we're carrying that DNA, right? we're carrying our ancestors and who we are as people of color and women of color. I don't know how this is going to sound, but for Black people to survive slavery and for you to be a descendants of that, you've got to be strong. For most Latinos to have survived the genocide and the illness and the conquest of the conquistadores, you've got to be strong, right? And what I love about one of my mentors, Juana Bordas, who's written this book called Salsa, Soul, and Spirit, Salsa, Latino, Soul, Native, Black, Spirit, Native leadership, right? She talks about the wisdom of leadership that comes from all of our ancestral practices, right? It's like acknowledging and remembering that our communities and our cultures existed for millennia before they wound up here, right? And that we carry that and we have that with us. And to survive what our communities have been through, only, it's regrettable, but it is primarily the strong who survive. So we have that strength, we have that DNA, we have those cultural traditions that are part of who we are. And I believe the more that we acknowledge, and I don't talk about this a lot in public, right? Because, I'm usually leading with the data, right? But the more that we acknowledge and understand that that's part of who we are in our DNA and our memory, that gives us the foundation to still stand strong and to know that we're carriers of all that came before us.
And I just want to say, I think what you just said, it made me just really kind of sit with thinking how my ancestors went through slavery and how, I've said this probably time and time again, there was so much growing up in Mississippi that I did not know about my own people. And I had to leave home actually and come here to Chicago, where I really started to understand more about things that happened during slavery, or things that happened not so long ago at the turn of the last century, in the 50s, the 60s, and things that I never learned in my history classes when I was in school in Mississippi. It took me probably coming here to graduate school and learning about the Great Migration.
Yeah.
I had never heard of this. I had no idea what this was. And I was meeting so many different people who say, oh, I got family in Mississippi. Oh, I got a cousin that's down there in Arkansas or such and such. And I would hear that and be like, oh, well, that's surely a lot of people up here from Mississippi, or they have ties to Mississippi. And then, of course, I started to learn about the Great Migration. I was like, well, no wonder a lot of African Americans on the South Side and on the West Side of Chicago have ties back to Mississippi. And Mississippi had the largest amount of African Americans that actually left Mississippi and settled in Chicago.
Right.
And I had no idea.
Yeah.
And so to kind of hear you talk about, using that information and using that knowledge and what we learn to really connect with our ancestors is, again, something that I am learning to process more and more, because as I mentioned, I didn't learn about these things until I was in my late 20s. And it was a little bit, I will say I had a little shame in that, because I had grown up all my life being Black, a Black woman, and these things that I never knew. And, it's still, like I say, I've begun to process those things, but it was a shame there.
But you weren't taught that, right? And you
Right, I was never taught it.
Right? I mean, even though it's prevalent as it was, you weren't taught that. I mean, the same thing for, this history I shared about my own family, right? I mean, I am proud to say that my family didn't cross the border crossed us, right? But what does that mean in terms of perseverance and how you survive and all of those things, right? That I was never taught that in school. Thank God my mother and my father were able to teach me that, because otherwise I would have gone around thinking, the same way so many of our youth are now, that we don't belong. But you know what? Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, California, right? Those are all Spanish names. Where do you think San Francisco and San Jose and Los Angeles come from, right? It's because we claimed that territory first. And so, now to be seen that we're the outsiders and we don't belong, when we were here centuries before, I mean, we taught the white men how to be cowboys, right? That all comes from knowledge that we taught them, right? And so, yeah, I don't usually go, again, most of my career has been about the policy change, right? But for my personal self, I've had to learn these things, and it's something that I encourage every young person to learn, because that's our history, right? No one can take that away from us. They may not acknowledge it, right, and appreciate it, right? But once you know that, no one can take that away from you.
Know it and be proud.
Right, exactly. And as I always say, someone can call me whatever name they want to, right? Or the ways that we're often marginalized as people. But if I believe them, then I'm giving them power over me. This is one of my biggest life lessons, right? Someone can call me wetback, someone, all the names that are out there, right? But if I take that in and believe it, then I'm saying they're right, and I'm giving them power over me. And I'm like, nope, I'm not going to give away my power to anyone, right? I know who I am, right? And you can throw me those darts, those daggers. You can talk to me about me any way you want, but that's your issue. It's not mine. I read the title of a book once. What you think of me is none of my business, right? What you think of me is none of my business, because it has everything to do with you and nothing to do with me. And my favorite book, since I'm on this rant, is one of my favorite books that I really encourage a lot of people to read, is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's a very simple book. It comes from the Toltec wisdom. But it's like, you don't take anything personally, right? You always do your best. I'm not going to remember all four of them right now. But it, really has taught me, it's like, that is a book that has taught me to stand in my power probably more than anything else. Because if I believe what every people says about me, or if I believe what the former president said about my community, then I'm giving it power. I'm not giving anybody that power unless I choose to give it to them, right? That's one of the biggest concerns I have with some of our youth, and the violence that we're seeing in the streets today, is you think someone insults you, you take it in as an insult, and you feel you have to retaliate. If you take that in as an insult, you are giving that person power over you, right? That is one of the things that I have learned also from the indigenous spirituality that I've been exposed to, right? Is I don't have to take that in, right? I know who I am. I know who I am as a child of the Creator. I know who I am as a child of God, right? And none of that relates to me, and I don't have to take it in.
And it's almost like you use what the negative things people say is kind of like an armor. You use that and to help you be stronger, because that's not how you identify. That's not your identity. That's not who you are. That's not who your ancestors are. And use that. I mean, for me, I was thinking, you know what? I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna show you, and who I really am, and how none of that fits with who I am. But you're so right. I think that statement you said. I believe you said it's a book. What somebody thinks of you is none of your business. Right. And that's so true. That's so true. What somebody, your ideas of me, I could really care less. I could care less. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What's that? Yes.
Well, yeah, no. There's just so many things that
I know it's so
much. But I think when you were talking about, like, knowing our history and where we come from, and something that, as a child of parents that migrated to this country in the late 70s, that's where my American history, familiar started for me. But, now that I'm older and I've started asking more questions, my mom's like, oh no, your great grandfather would come and work here, as a farm worker. And I was like, where was this history? Like, what is all this? And understanding that there's so much that, whether it was my family or Mexicans have done for this country, and it's not it's not taught in any history. You have to wait to college, so maybe you can take some, US Mexican history kind of course or something, and start maybe understanding. But even the lens where that is taught from is not really a full kind of, Latino lens. Is always going to come from a very whitewashed probably version of it. But I think it's just so important. And I think, I always talk about how, like, now is when I start learning more. Now where I'll do my research and I'll go through that learning journey to kind of understand. And I'm the one now having the conversations with my siblings, and they're like, "Oh, here you go, telling us again," or like my parents, and like because their version of history is so different from like I'm reading. I'm like, no, that's not how it happened. Like, here's how it is. Like, this is what really happened, and all these things. But it's just so important to know that, because those are things that will help, that have helped me really just be like, okay, this is part of who I am, part of my history. My family was part of this portion of it. And you can stand on that, and and I look at it sort of on my, on my faith, and that faith journey, and how that kind of coincides with even our historical history here, and understanding that. I think is just, it's so powerful to to hear from you and from others, to just that understanding, and to know that there are others that are part of this journey, and trying to understand and write a different story, and be like, that's who society and who a lot of people in this country have tried to paint us as. That's you. Like, that's not on me. Like, go ahead and do whatever you want, but we know who we are.
Yeah.
So I always say, some of my life lessons, it's like, you've got to know who you are. And I usually start with your cultural identity, but these days it could be the youth identity culture, right? The hip hop culture, the whatever, in terms of who your identity is. Part of that knowing who you are is understanding your values. And I always say that's knowing who you are when no one is looking. What do you value? What's important to you? How do you make a decision when nobody is looking, right? Are those values of trust? Are they values of faith? Are they values of, being smart, right? But integrity, right? What are those values, right? I always say, and what I would say to you both is, I think you are doing, you're stepping up to leadership. And I think everybody has that leadership potential. Everybody, because my definition of leadership is you have the opportunity to influence those around you, whether it's on a big stage or on a small stage. As you were sharing, influencing your family, Seth, right? I'm sure you're, if you have nieces and nephews, right? Or all those around you, right? Leadership is how do you help influence them and help them understand, but also how do you help bring them along? How do you extend a hand, right? How do you read the college essay of someone that's going to applying for college, or help someone figure out their FAFSA form, right? So leadership is about how you're helping to bring the community, even if you're only doing it with one person, right? So you know who you are, you step up to leadership, and if we all stepped up to leadership, then there'd be so much that's happening that we can do to bring people along with us. And then you've got to take time, you shared you're both introverts. I am an extrovert, but I'm close to the introvert line, because you need to take that time to reflect. You need to take that time to nurture your spirit. You've got to take time, whatever that is, whether it's walking on the lake, meditation, prayer, belonging to a faith community, riding your bike, making sure you're getting whatever that is, right? Finding that ways to nurture your spirit, because that's when what's your creative mind, or I believe we get messages about how we should be and do in the world, even if it's just going within and listening to the quiet within us in terms of what it reveals, right? So understanding our cultural identity and our values, stepping up to leadership, But then also making that time to nurture your spirit, whatever that looks like, I think are so important. And I'm going to out myself here. So not something I usually talk about in public, right? But for me, that shift of identity shifted when my first identity went, for a lot of my life, my first identity was being Latina, being Chicana, who I was in terms of my racial and my ethnic identity. But when I grew up Catholic, and not Catholicism and me did not go together. So when you reject the religion that you were born into, you think, what else is there? Especially when you grow up Catholic, you have no idea that there are other faith traditions and other religions, right? And not that I'm connected to any particular faith tradition right now, but it was a shift from my first identity not being a woman, which it had been, not being a Latina, which it had been, but I heard the phrase, I am a spiritual being having a human experience. The first time I heard that, it just sort of knocked me over the head. I am a spiritual being having a human experience. And so when I was able to shift my awareness and my consciousness to say, that's it. My first identity is that I know I'm part of the divine. I know that I'm a spiritual being, whatever my, not religious practice, but whatever my faith practice is, right? I am a spiritual being, right? Then everything else shifted around me. Now, I don't remember that all the time every day, right? But when I have to go to and remember that, then how I show up is how people respond to me, right? I have that seared in my soul. I have that seared in my consciousness. I don't have to say it out loud, right? But it is one of the reasons I believe that people respond to me the way that they do.
I'm gonna use that, Sylvia. I love that. I'm a spiritual being you said I'm a spiritual being in a human body?
Yeah, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience.
Having a human experience. I'm gonna use that.
We're having this human experience because of whatever lessons we need to learn, or we believe in past lives or not, whatever reasons we need to know. But every faith tradition, right? And this is where I always argue with people that say that they're, whatever the word is, that they believe in no God. I was like, every faith tradition, right? Whether it's Buddhism, Sufism, the ancient Aztecs and the Mayans, Protestants, the Muslims, Catholics, right? Every faith tradition believes in a divine being, right? And that we're emanations of whatever we think that higher power is. I don't know a faith tradition that doesn't say that in some form or fashion, right?
Right.
So to me, when I realized that, I was like, oh, I guess I can't. Well, I never really thought I was an atheist, but like, that's not going to work for me, because it's like and like, how am I but to know better than the millennia of all these faith traditions from all over the planet that at their core really are so similar. I mean, their expressions of it can be very different, but some of those principles that are common to all of them really are about, we're here to do our work, we're here to learn our lessons, right? But we're here as expressions of the divine.
Wow. Sylvia, thank you so much again for coming on here and speaking with us, having a conversation with us. I'm excited for the viewers to watch this. I'm excited for people to listen to this, and just want to thank you. It's been great for me. I know this has really been just kind of sitting back and listening to you. I feel like I didn't want to say too much. I really wanted to listen to you and your stories and your advice and just everything that you had to say. So I will turn it over to Lisette to give us a wrap up, and anything Sylvia would like to add as well as we.
Well, I'll just have the last word. I'll just say thank you for the opportunity, because I don't often get to talk about this kind of stuff out loud. Right. And now I've sort of outed myself, and it's going to be public. It took a little bit of I do consider myself a courageous person, but it still took a little bit of courage. I'll just share that, right, to share on the way that I've shared today. But if it inspires one person, then I'm blessed to be able to offer it as a gift.
Thank you so much again, Sylvia. I think and then knowing you, I remember when I first met you, I was like, that's a woman that has something to say. But yeah, I know you were always sort of in the back watching us during the Leadership Academy, and when you would share, I think we all listened. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that when they listen to this will be inspired. I know I have been inspired. I think I've been fed today from the words that you've shared, and the wisdom and your experiences. I thank you for that. And I hope that those that have been listening and watching have also been inspired, or something just kind of pulled you into a direction, whether it was something that made you happy, upset, angry, you just did not agree with it. We're here to have that conversation with you. So please share your thoughts and your comments below. And again, we thank you. We will continue having more conversations with other women that you'll see as well. But we appreciate this time that we had with Sylvia. And we definitely look forward to sharing more with our listeners and our viewers. So please keep an eye out as more conversations are to come. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day, evening, weekend, whenever you're watching this. And I hope we see you again, or you get to see you, or you get to hear us again and see us again. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Peace, everybody.